That inspired me to bring my water up here. Wanted to bring it to you, but it was already used. 8:56? Okay, thank you.
8:56.
Trying to do too many things at once. It's good to see everybody tonight. I hope the things that we'll study will be helpful to you in some way and interesting. We're going to start in Matthew chapter 12 tonight to kind of introduce the idea. If you'll turn there, we're going to read a couple of verses here to get started. Matthew chapter 12, we're going to read starting in verse 38. Where it says here, "Then certain of the scribes and of the Pharisees answered, saying, Master, we would see a sign from thee. But he answered and said unto them, An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign. And there shall no sign be given to it, but the sign of the prophet Jonas. For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonas. And behold, a greater than Jonas is here. The queen of the south shall rise up in the judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it. For she came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, a greater than Solomon is here." And so the scribes and the Pharisees here, they wanted some kind of sign. They wanted a sign, and they were asking him for a sign to prove himself, so they would believe on Jesus. And Jesus reaches back to 2 stories that we can read in the Old Testament that happened 700 to 1,000 years prior. And he pulled up these 2 accounts, or mentioned these two accounts. The first being Jonah, or as it's said here, Jonas. Jonas is the Greek form of the Hebrew name Jonas. We see a little bit of a different spelling sometimes in some of the names, and that happens in this case. But he talks about Jonah and the message that he brought to Nineveh. And the message here is that the Ninevites, they repented based on the teaching of Jonah. They didn't need a sign. They just had Jonah go to them and teach. And the message here is a greater than Jonah is here. You know, Jesus being a greater teacher, a greater messenger than Jonah. And he was there. He was standing before them. Why do you need a sign? And then in verse 42, he talks about the queen of the south. Again, talks about her coming from the uttermost part of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And in a similar way to Jonah, kind of says the same thing. A greater than Solomon is here. And, you know, we know that Solomon was wise, and he's talking about himself. Jesus was there, and he was certainly more wise. And as the creator of the universe and the flesh standing before him, certainly greater than Solomon. You know, we probably know the story of Jonah. We probably learned that from a very young age, something that we at least know parts of from a very young age, and how that story comes about. Chalk gave us a lesson just very recently on the story of Jonah. So I'm not going to study that one tonight, but I do want to think about the queen of the south that it talks about here. And kind of ask the question, who is this queen of the south? Who is this person that he's referring to? Where can we find information about her? What did she do? What happened in that case? Why does he reference back to the queen of the south? And what can we emulate, or what can we learn from this story as we study out a few things about it? So first of all, where can we find information about this queen of the south that he's referring to? If you look in the Old Testament, we're going to spend time in 1 Kings chapter 10. There's a couple of places, parallel accounts, if you will. One is 1 Kings chapter 10. The other is 2 Chronicles chapter 9. They're very similar. I'm not going to go back and forth and for any reason because they're pretty similar accounts. But we're gonna look at who the queen of the south is in 1 Kings chapter 10. But before we go there, you'll keep flipping back a little bit further. We're going to go to 1 Kings chapter 3. To tell a little bit about the backstory of Solomon, because he'll be a big part of this account here and why she was going to seek him. In 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 5, it says, "In Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. And God said, Ask what I shall give thee. And Solomon said, Thou hast showed unto thy servant David, my father, great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart with thee. And thou hast kept for him this great kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father. And I am but a child. I know not how to go out or come in. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, a great people that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. And in verse 9 it says, Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad, for who is able to judge this, thy so great a people? And the speech pleased the Lord, and that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said unto him, Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment, behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and an understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. And I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days. And if thou wilt walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments, as thy father David did walk, then I will lengthen thy days. And so Solomon here is given this opportunity by God. God's asked him, ask of something and I'll give it to you. And Solomon asked in this case for wisdom. And God was impressed by this. He was impressed by this ask of wisdom. He could have asked for any other things, riches and other things, but he asked for wisdom. And so God was impressed enough that he not only gave him the wisdom that he asked for, but he gave him other things like riches and like honor and promise of long life if he followed him. And so he was blessed in this way, and that there would be nobody like him, no other king that would be like him. And so we see that as an introduction to kind of where Solomon comes into this story. We get a little bit more of the scope of his wisdom in the next chapter, 1 Kings chapter 4, in verse 29 through 32, where it says, And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding exceeding much, and largeness of heart, even as the sand that is on the seashore. And Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country, and all the wisdom of Egypt, for he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, and Chalcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahal. And his fame was in all nations round about. And he spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. And so he was wise. It talks a little bit about his wisdom here. But the other thing you'll notice is it says his fame was in all nations round about. And so people knew about Solomon. They knew of him because of his wisdom, because of the things that God had given and blessed him with. So that kind of introduces Solomon to this story that we're going to read in 1 Kings chapter 10 as we try to find out who this Queen of the South is and what happens in this case. So in 1 Kings chapter 10, we'll kind of read through eventually the first 13 verses, but we'll stop and talk about it as we go. So in 1 Kings chapter 10 and verse 1, it says, And when the queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to prove him with hard questions. So Sheba is mentioned here, the queen of Sheba. And so I'll pull up I don't have a lot of slides, kind of like the last time I think I spoke. I had one or two slides, and I don't know how well you can see this, but this is a map. This is where they think Sheba would have been. There's some discussion about how correct that is, but it seems like that's probably the place down where you see this, the very southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. And if you look, it's pretty far south from Israel. Israel's way up here, if you can see that. And so this is where Sheba is, the Queen of Sheba that it refers to here. It's about 1,000 to 1,500 miles between Sheba and Israel that'll come into play as we talk about this particular story. So it's a pretty long distance towards the south that this Queen of Sheba is ruling. And you can see the pictures on the left. That's kind of the type of area it's probably out there. It looks wonderful, great place to live, right? If you look at the next This is more of a current day map, but you can see Yemen is probably where that location around Yemen is where that Queen of Sheba would have been ruling. And you can see it doesn't have Israel here, but you can see the distance. And you can see the Arabian desert in the middle of that. And so some kind of way, as we'll see, is she's traveling up. There's desert. This is not an easy path to go. So it's a long ways. If you think about distance-wise, here to Chicago is about 1,000 miles. Here to New York is about 1,500. It's somewhere in between there is the distance that we're talking about. And it says, she heard the fame of Solomon concerning the Lord, and she was going to prove him with hard questions. And so she wanted to ask questions of him. She knew he knew a lot of things, had wisdom, and she wanted to go and have discussion and perhaps riddles and other things to understand from Solomon, those types of things. As we'll read here a little bit later, they were likely on camels. This was a journey that probably took 75 days, some estimate, to get one way from one place to the other. Back in those times, would have been difficult, as I say, terrain, dangers as they traveled. There was not always friendly lands, and of course, leaving behind the comforts of home and your own kingdom and the things that she was doing there. So she was traveling a great way away from her kingdom to go to see Solomon, and we'll learn a little bit more about that as we go. And in verse 2 it says, and she came to Jerusalem with a very great train, with camels. Like I said, camels was likely used to travel, with camels that bear spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart. And so again, this was a long journey. It says there was a very great train. Unfortunately, it wasn't a locomotive train for her. She would have probably loved that, but a very great train. It was an entourage of people that were traveling with her, a host of people, probably guards, probably people that would protect a queen as she traveled. This location was known for the spices that they would have had, and so she was probably wealthy and traded those goods. And if you look up Sheba in the Bible, we won't go to all the references. There's a lot about spices and trade that we can see in the Bible about this Sheba that she's ruling. And so she's probably got valuables to with her as well, and we'll see that later that she does. And so she's likely got a group of soldiers traveling with her. So it's not a small group. It's probably a large group trying to make this trek up to see Solomon in this place. I had this vision in my head, and all I could think of was Aladdin and the parade that they do through the desert. It's probably not what it looked like, but I tried to look up and get that out of my head. Maybe it was something more like one of these pictures. This is what AI can do for you. We learned a little bit about technology from Carrie, but this is AI-generated camels through the desert. Probably not something you want to do for 75 days on the way, one way to go see anything, but it was worth it to her to go and make this trip to seek the wisdom of Solomon. And so that's what she intended to do. That's the end of my PowerPoint for today, so I'll put that to the side. But she wanted to ask him these questions and have these conversations and learn what she could from this person that she had heard about that was wise. And in verse 3 it says, and Solomon told her all her questions. There was not anything hid from the king which he told her not. So Solomon in his wisdom was able to answer whatever those things were. He was able to answer these questions, and he didn't hold back anything. As it says here, I would have loved to have a list of all the discussions and all the things that maybe she asked, but that's not in this account. In verse 4 it says, and when the queen of Sheba had seen all Solomon's wisdom, and the house that he had built, and the meat of his table, and the sitting of his servants, and the attendance of his ministers, and their apparel, and his cupbearers, and his ascent by which he went up into the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her. And she said to the king, it is a true report that I heard in mine own land of the acts and of thy wisdom. Howbeit I believed not the words until I came, and mine eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard. And so she came and she saw the wisdom. She had the discussions with Solomon. She was impressed by that. She was impressed by the house and the palace and all the things that were around him, the people that were around him. And she said, I didn't believe it until I saw it, until I traveled here and was able to see it with my own eyes. It talks about his ascent. That's possibly referring to burnt offerings that were being offered by Solomon. But once she did see it, it was twice as good. It was twice as good as what she had heard, even in the things that she had heard from his being talked about through his fame. And so it was amazing to see how blessed Solomon was from God. In verse 8 it says, Happy are thy men, happy are these thy servants, which stand continually before thee, and that hear thy wisdom. Blessed be the Lord thy God, which delighteth in thee, to set thee on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord loved Israel forever, therefore made he thee king to do judgment and justice. So it mentions here the servants that get to be there and to stand and to hear the wisdom. She recognized that Solomon was blessed by God. In verse 10 it says, And she gave the king 120 talents of gold, and of spices very great store, and precious stones. There came no more such abundance of spices as these which the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. So again, she was traveling with all these things and this gold and precious stones, and it says it gave an abundance of spices. Like I said, that area was known for, and probably brought her a lot of wealth as they traded those spices. And so she brought those to Solomon. Verse 11, it says, In the navy also of Hiram, that brought gold from Ophir, brought in from Ophir great plenty of almug trees and precious stones, and the king made of the almug trees pillars for the house of the Lord and for the king's house, harps also and psalteries for singers. There came no such almug trees, nor were seen unto this day. And King Solomon gave unto the queen of Sheba all her desire, whatsoever she asked, beside that which Solomon gave her of his royal bounty. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. And so Solomon here, he gave whatever she wanted. He was blessed in many ways, and he offered her and gave her anything that she wanted before she departed and made her journey back to the country, to her own country. So this here is the queen of the south that Jesus is talking about. You can see it was quite a bit south from where where Solomon was. I saw one thing, I don't know if this is true, some speculated this was as south as anybody lived at that time. It was certainly as south as you could get on the Arabian Peninsula, because that was the kingdom that she had way down in the south of that peninsula. But this is the queen of the south that he's referring to in this story that we read earlier. So what can we think about or try to apply from this story? One of the things that you hopefully gather is, the queen sought wisdom. We had already seen that God was pleased when Solomon sought wisdom, and she was also going to find wisdom. Many traveled great distances in that time. Leaders and kings, if they were traveling great distances, it was likely to do something else. It was probably not to go and find wisdom. It was to conquer another location. It was to take prisoners. It was to find gold or treasures and things like that. That's not what she was doing. She was making this great trip to do something more noble, and that was to find wisdom. In Proverbs chapter 3, not surprisingly, something Solomon wrote. Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 13, it says, Happy is the man that findeth wisdom, and the man that getteth understanding, for the merchandise of it is better than the merchandise of silver, and the gain thereof than fine gold. She is more precious than rubies, and all the things that thou canst desire are not to be compared unto her. And then in James chapter 1, after understanding how important wisdom can be, we read here where it says, James chapter 1 verse 5, says, If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. And so we need to make sure that we seek those things that are important as well. We need to seek things like wisdom and not the things of the earth, not the gold and silver and the things that we can sometimes get caught up in seeking here in this life. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 19. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 19, a familiar verse here reminding us where we need to keep our mind. It says, lay not up for yourself treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. And so we need to make sure that we're seeking the things that make sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense to chase those things that are going to eventually rust and corrupt and the things of this world, but we need to seek those things above. And she wasn't worried about that. She was worried about wisdom instead. And we need to seek wisdom in our life as well, especially wisdom from God. You know, she was willing to sacrifice in this story. She was willing to go through some things that maybe weren't easy. This journey that she was on, as you can imagine, I'm not sure I could ride a camel for 75 days straight if that's what she did or whatever the case may be. So there was some effort, there was some time, there was some resources she went through and used in order to sacrifice and to go and to seek wisdom from Solomon. You know, God hasn't promised us an easy life, but if we'll serve him, we'll be blessed, right? In Matthew chapter 13, verse 45 and verse 46. It says, again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchant man seeking goodly pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it. You know, we need to make sure that we understand what's important. We need to understand that if we understand what's important as far as God's kingdom and seeking after God's kingdom, we can put all the other stuff to the side and not worry about it. You know, she was also willing to listen. You know, if you think about her position, she was a queen. She was somebody in authority, somebody that probably could have gone through life and done her own thing and not listen to anybody, make her own rules, literally. And yet she was willing to go out and seek wisdom and listen to someone else and kind of humble herself and say, hey, I don't know all the answers here. And sometimes we think we have it all figured out. Maybe we have all the answers in our life. And yet maybe we need to be a little bit like her and be willing to put that aside and think, you know, we don't have it all figured out all the time, and we need to seek wisdom and seek God's wisdom especially. And that was kind of the story, that was kind of the point Jesus was trying to make as he was speaking to the scribes and the Pharisees, that they need to listen to someone greater than Solomon even, and that was Jesus. In Matthew chapter 7 and verse 24, Matthew chapter 7 and verse number 24. Starting there, it says, therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man, which built his house upon a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. And of course, we continue to read, and we can see if you don't do that, if you don't follow and listen to God and don't have our foundation upon that rock, we're not wise and our house falls, right? And so we need to be that wise man, and we need to make sure that we have our foundation and listen to God's teaching and to Jesus Christ. The queen was pretty amazed with what she saw. She looked around and she saw Solomon. One of the things that I get from this is she was pretty impressed with what she saw. It was twice as good as anything that she had even heard, and she was amazed by it. You know, as we look around in our life, if we look around the world, we should be amazed as well by what God has done for us. You know, if we look at the creation of the world and look at what God has done, we should all be amazed at what's been done. We can look back to the cross and be amazed at what God was willing to do for us there. Look at what Christ was willing to do for us there as well, and the promises that he has given to us, and we should all be amazed with that. And at the end, the queen was given a lot from Solomon. In verse 13 of the story there, it says, King Solomon gave unto the queen of Sheba all her desire, whatsoever she asked, beside that that which Solomon gave her of his royal bounty. You know, Solomon was able to give a lot. You know, he had more treasure and more worldly goods than really we could probably imagine. But it says, better than Solomon has come, right? You know, despite what Solomon was able to give, Christ could give so much more. And we need to recognize and appreciate what Christ offers to us. You know, the blessings that he offers us is beyond anything that Solomon could ever offer to this queen. If you'll turn to John chapter 14. John chapter 14, beyond the blessings that we get from God here as we live our life, which there are a ton of. In John 14 and verse 1, it says, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also." Again, a greater than Solomon has come. It's blessings that he is preparing for us is way beyond what Solomon would be able to give to this queen. So, you know, while Solomon was a king, you know, Christ is the King of Kings. While Solomon had riches, Christ offers so much more. And we need to make sure that we're seeking the wisdom of Christ. So in conclusion, you know, as we look at this story and we look at the message here, while she sought Solomon and his fame, how much more important should it be for us to seek God and seek after Christ? To see, like the message was to those that the scribes and the Pharisees, he offered so much more and they were blind to it. They didn't want to see it. They sought a sign to prove it, and yet we are so much more blessed because we are really on this side of the cross. We can look back and understand what's been done for us. We can understand and see his full plan for us, his plan to reconcile us to him and have our sins forgiven. And so being on this side of the cross, we should very much appreciate and I don't know another word for it, appreciate what we've been given through that. And so I hope we'll seek after the wisdom, seek after God's word, study God's word, follow Christ, and of course through that we've got that promise of an eternal life with him in heaven. If you haven't taken the steps to become a child of God, to be joined to his kingdom, and you'd like to do that tonight, we certainly invite you to do that and obey the gospel and be baptized, as Brad talked about this morning. Or if you need the prayers of the church in any way, we certainly invite you to come as we stand and sing the song of invitation.